The oak floors of our custom-built suburban home had always felt like the foundation of my greatest achievement. I am 35 years old, an architect by trade, and for the last 7 years I believed I had engineered the perfect life. Every molding I installed, every light fixture I carefully selected, was meant to be a testament to the love I held for my wife, Victoria. Victoria was 32, stunningly beautiful, and possessed the kind of effortless grace that only comes from generational wealth. She was the only daughter of Arthur Pendleton, a titan of the logistics industry, a man whose net worth was discussed in hushed, reverent tones in the boardrooms of our city. Arthur was an intimidating figure. He was old school in every sense of the word. A man who still wore three-piece suits to Sunday dinners, who believed a handshake was a binding contract, and who demanded absolute loyalty and integrity from everyone in his orbit. When I first asked for Victoria's hand in marriage, Arthur had brought me into his mahogany-paneled study, poured me a glass of 20-year-old scotch, and looked at me with eyes that felt like they were assessing the structural integrity of my soul. "I am giving you my most prized possession," he had rumbled, his voice like grinding stones. "You protect her, you honor her, you build a life that is honest. I do not tolerate liars and I do not abide betrayal." Are we understood? I had promised him with every fiber of my being that I would be the husband she deserved. And for 7 years I poured my soul into keeping that promise. I worked grueling 80-hour weeks at my firm to ensure I could contribute equally to our lifestyle, never wanting to be seen as a freeloader coasting on the Pendleton fortune. Victoria worked nominally as a VP of marketing for one of her father's subsidiary companies, a title that came with a corner office she rarely visited, and a massive salary she spent entirely on designer bags, luxury spa retreats, and bottomless brunches with her socialite friends. I never minded, I loved her, I wanted her to be happy. But for the past 2 years, a shadow had crept over our immaculate life. We had been trying for a baby. Month after month, the negative tests piled up in the bathroom trash can, each one a tiny heartbreak that seemed to chip away at Victoria's patience and my self-esteem. She became distant, irritable, and prone to sudden, explosive arguments over the smallest things. She started taking more weekend girls' trips to decompress from the stress of trying to conceive. I, carrying the heavy burden of assumed guilt, threw myself into researching fertility diets, tracking ovulation cycles, and doing everything in my power to support her. 6 weeks ago, the guilt became too much. I was convinced the problem lay with me. The stress of my job, the endless late nights, it had to be my fault we couldn't start a family. Without telling Victoria, I booked an appointment with a top-tier urologist specializing in male fertility. I wanted to have all the facts, perhaps a treatment plan, before I brought my failure to her. The clinic was sterile, cold, and smelled sharply of antiseptic. The process was humiliating, but I endured it, driven by the desperate desire to give my wife the child she so clearly wanted. I waited agonizingly for a week to get the results. When the urologist finally called me back into his office, his expression was grave. He didn't mince words. He showed me the charts, the microscopic analyses, the hormone panels. "I'm incredibly sorry, Mark," Dr. Evans had said, his voice soft but carrying the weight of a sledgehammer. "You have a condition called non-obstructive azoospermia. To put it plainly, your body does not produce sperm. It's not a matter of low count, it is a zero count. The testicular biopsy confirmed it. You are completely sterile. It is a congenital issue, and unfortunately, it is irreversible." I remember sitting in my car in the clinic parking lot for 3 hours after that appointment. The world had dissolved into static. I wept until my chest ached. My dreams of fatherhood, of teaching a little boy how to throw a baseball, of walking a daughter down the aisle, were instantly vaporized. But even through the crushing grief, my primary thought was of Victoria. How was I going to tell her? How was I going to look into the eyes of the woman I loved and tell her I was fundamentally broken? I spent weeks trying to gather the courage, rehearsing the conversation in my head 1,000 times, waiting for the right, quiet moment to shatter both of our worlds. That moment never came. Instead, the universe decided to deliver a punchline to a joke I didn't know I was a part of. It was a Tuesday evening. I had come home early, having finally resolved that tonight was the night I would confess my medical reality. I had bought her favorite flowers, cooked her favorite meal, and sat at the dining table, my heart hammering against my ribs. Victoria walked in, dropping her Birkin bag on the entryway console. She didn't look stressed. She looked radiant. There was a flush to her cheeks, a brightness in her eyes that I hadn't seen in months. "Mark," she said, practically skipping into the dining room. She didn't even notice the elaborate dinner or the flowers. She walked straight up to me, pulled a small plastic stick from her designer coat pocket, and slammed it onto the table right next to my plate. 2 pink lines. I'm pregnant, she announced, a beaming, triumphant smile plastered across her face. We finally did it, I'm pregnant. Time stopped, the air in the room suddenly felt as thick as molasses. I stared at the test, then up at her glowing face, then back at the test. A roaring sound filled my ears like a freight train rushing through my living room. My mind desperately tried to connect the two absolute contradictory truths that now occupied my reality. Truth 1. I am completely, irreversibly sterile. Truth 2. My wife is pregnant. The math was devastatingly simple. You're pregnant, I choked out, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Yes, can you believe it? She clapped her hands together. After all this time, I knew we just had to relax and let it happen. I took the test this morning at the office, and I went to the doctor this afternoon for a blood test to be absolutely sure. I'm 6 weeks along, Mark. We're going to be parents. I looked at the woman I had worshipped for 7 years. The illusion of our perfect life shattered into a million jagged pieces, slicing into my sanity. She was lying to my face, expecting me to celebrate the evidence of her infidelity. The sheer audacity, the sociopathic ease with which she smiled at me, triggered something deep within my core. The grief of my sterility instantly evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating, and terrifyingly calm rage. I didn't yell, I didn't flip the table. I leaned back in my chair, steepled my fingers, and looked at her. Really looked at her. 6 weeks, I repeated, my voice devoid of any inflection. That's wonderful, Victoria, truly a miracle. She blinked, her smile faltering just a fraction. A miracle? Well, I mean, it's biology, honey. But yes, it feels like one. Aren't you happy? You look weird. I am just overwhelmed by the biology of it all, I said slowly. I reached into my briefcase, which was sitting on the floor next to me, and pulled out the thick manila envelope I had been carrying around like a lead weight for weeks. I tossed it onto the table, right next to her positive pregnancy test. Because, according to the top urologist in the state, my biology makes this impossible. Victoria frowned, staring at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. What is that? Those are my medical records, Victoria, I said, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper. I went to a clinic a month and a half ago because I thought I was the reason we couldn't conceive, and I was right. I have non-obstructive azoospermia. I am completely 100% sterile. I have zero sperm. I could not get you pregnant if we tried for 1,000 lifetimes. I watched the color drain from her face in real time. The radiant flush vanished, replaced by an ashen, sickly pallor. Her mouth opened and closed silently like a fish pulled from the water. The silence in the room was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. So I continued, leaning forward, resting my elbows on the table. I'll ask you again, Victoria, who is the father? For a long, agonizing minute, she just stared at me. I could see the gears turning in her head, watching her try to formulate a lie, an excuse, a way out of the corner she had painted herself into. But the medical documents were right there. There was no gaslighting her way out of this. And then something incredible happened. The panic in her eyes faded, her posture straightened. The mask of the loving, devoted wife completely dissolved, revealing a cold, arrogant stranger underneath. She actually laughed. It wasn't a nervous laugh, it was a cruel, condescending scoff. Well, she sighed, crossing her arms over her chest and looking down at me with absolute disdain. I suppose that saves me the trouble of pretending for the next 9 months. Pretending, I echoed, my blood turning to ice. Oh, grow up, Mark, she snapped, rolling her eyes. Did you really think I was going to spend the rest of my life playing house with a workaholic architect who can't even give me a child? You've been boring me for years. The endless talk about blueprints, the budgeting, the saving. It's pathetic. I'm a Pendleton. I deserve excitement. I deserve passion. And who provides this passion? I asked, my voice dangerously steady. His name is Jax, she said, a sickeningly fond smile touching her lips. He's a DJ. I met him 6 months ago at a club when I was on one of my weekend trips. He's an artist, Mark. He understands me in a way you never could. He's spontaneous, he's alive, and unlike you, he's a real man who can actually give me what I want. A club DJ named Jax. 7 years of marriage, a vow before God and her terrifying father, thrown away for a bass drop in a guy named Jax. The absurdity of it almost made me laugh. So what's the plan, Victoria? I asked. You were just going to let me raise Jax the DJ's baby as my own. Let me pay for its college while you kept sleeping with him on the side. That was the general idea, yes, she admitted shamelessly. You make good money, Mark. You're stable. Jax is finding himself right now. He needs a patron. I figured you could play the doting father, provide the lifestyle I require, and Jax and I could continue our relationship. It was a perfect arrangement, but I suppose you've ruined that now. I was staring at a monster. I want a divorce. I want you out of this house tonight. Victoria threw her head back and let out a sharp, mocking laugh. Out of this house. Are you delusional? Mark, darling, look around you. Do you know who my father is? Do you know the kind of legal team he keeps on retainer? She walked around the table, leaning down so her face was inches from mine. Her perfume, a scent I used to love, now made me want to vomit. I am the mother of a child now, she hissed, a venomous smile on her lips. I am the vulnerable, pregnant wife, and you are the cruel husband trying to throw me out on the street. I will take this house, I will take half of your firm, I will take your savings. My father's lawyers will tie you up in court for so long you'll be bankrupt before the judge even bangs the gavel. My father will crush you, Mark. He will ruin your reputation in this city. You will have nothing, and Jax and I will raise our child in this beautiful custom home you built for me. She patted my cheek condescendingly. Pack a bag, Mark. You can sleep at a motel tonight. I'll have my father's legal team send the papers to your office in the morning. She turned and walked up the stairs, humming a tune, leaving me sitting in the wreckage of my life. She thought she had won. She thought her father's immense wealth and power were her ultimate shield. But Victoria, in all her arrogant, spoiled entitlement, had made one fatal miscalculation. She had fundamentally misunderstood who Arthur Pendleton was. She saw her father as a bank, she saw him as a weapon to be pointed at her enemies. But I knew Arthur, I had sat in his study, I had looked him in the eye. Arthur Pendleton was a ruthless businessman, yes, but he was driven by a rigid, almost archaic code of honor. He despised liars, he loathed infidelity. He valued loyalty above money, above power, and as I was betting my entire future on, perhaps even above blood, I didn't pack a bag, I didn't go to a motel. I waited until I heard the shower running upstairs. Then I quietly packed my briefcase. I put the urologist's report inside. I went to her home office, booted up her unlocked MacBook, and spent the next hour exporting the entire history of her iMessages to a flash drive. She hadn't even bothered to hide it. There were thousands of texts with Jax, pictures, videos, explicit conversations mocking me, detailing their encounters, and laughing about the plan to pass the baby off as mine. I printed out the worst of them, a thick stack of undeniable, disgusting proof. I put the flash drive and the printouts into my briefcase next to my medical file. I walked out to my car, started the engine, and drove into the night. But I didn't drive to a motel. I drove toward the wealthiest zip code in the state. I drove to the Pendleton estate. It was nearly 11 o'clock at night when I pulled up to the massive wrought iron gates of Arthur's property. The security guard recognized my car and buzzed me through. I drove up the winding, tree-lined driveway, my headlights sweeping across the sprawling, imposing stone mansion. I parked, walked up the grand steps, and rang the doorbell. 10 minutes later, I was sitting in the same mahogany-paneled study where I had asked for Victoria's hand 7 years prior. The room smelled of old paper, leather, and expensive tobacco. Arthur Pendleton sat behind his massive oak desk, wearing a silk dressing gown, his silver hair slightly tousled, but his sharp, hawk-like eyes wide awake and intensely focused on me. "It is late, Mark," Arthur said, his voice a low rumble. "You look like you've seen a ghost. What is so urgent that it couldn't wait until morning?" I didn't speak, I couldn't. My hands were shaking as I unlatched my briefcase. I pulled out the thick stack of papers in the medical folder and placed them squarely on the center of his desk. "I am sorry to disturb you, Arthur," I finally managed to say, my voice raspy. "But I made you a promise in this very room 7 years ago. I promised you I would build an honest life with your daughter. I am here to tell you that I kept my promise." Victoria did not. Arthur frowned, a deep crease forming between his brows. He looked at the stack of papers, then back at me. He didn't ask questions. He picked up his reading glasses, put them on, and opened the first folder. My medical records. I sat in absolute silence and watched the most powerful man I knew read the documentation of my biological failure. He read it thoroughly, his face an unreadable mask of stone. When he finished, he set the file down and looked at me. There was a flicker of genuine sympathy in those cold eyes. "I am sorry, son," Arthur said softly. "This is a heavy burden." "It gets heavier, Arthur," I replied, gesturing to the other stack of papers. "Victoria came home tonight. She told me she is 6 weeks pregnant." The sympathy in Arthur's eyes vanished instantly. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet 20 degrees. His jaw clenched so hard I thought his teeth might shatter. He didn't say a word. He reached for the stack of printed iMessages. For the next 20 minutes, the only sound in the cavernous study was the ticking of the grandfather clock and the sharp, crisp sound of paper turning. I watched as Arthur Pendleton read the vile, mocking words written by his own daughter. I watched him look at the printed photos of her with another man. I watched him read her smug declarations of how she planned to use his money, his lawyers, and his power to destroy the husband who had done nothing but love her. With every page he turned, Arthur seemed to age, yet simultaneously grow more terrifying. The man I saw behind that desk was no longer a father reading about his daughter. He was a king discovering treason within his own court. When he reached the final page, he slowly took off his glasses and placed them on the desk. He stacked the papers neatly, aligning the edges with meticulous precision. He sat back in his heavy leather chair and closed his eyes. He stayed like that for a long time. When he finally opened his eyes, they were cold, dead, and entirely devoid of mercy. She invoked my name, Arthur said, his voice barely a whisper, yet it echoed with the force of a thunderclap. She dragged my honor into the mud, spread her legs for a parasite, and dared to wield my reputation as a weapon to steal from a man who treated her like a queen. He stood up abruptly, walked over to his crystal decanter, and poured 2 heavy glasses of scotch. He handed one to me. "Drink," he commanded. I took a sip, it burned like fire. Arthur walked behind his desk, picked up the heavy brass telephone, and dialed a number from memory. It was midnight, but the person on the other end answered on the second ring. "Harrison," Arthur barked into the phone, "wake up, I need you at your office in 1 hour. Draft a termination notice for Victoria from her VP position. Cause gross moral turpitude bringing disrepute to the company. Cancel all her corporate credit cards. Freeze the trust fund immediately." He paused, listening to the tiny, panicked voice on the other end of the line. "I don't care what time it is," Arthur roared, slamming his fist on the desk. "Do it now, and Harrison, I need you to draw up divorce papers. The plaintiff is Mark. You will represent him. You will represent him with the full weight of my firm behind you. You will draft an ironclad prenup enforcement. You will file for an emergency eviction order for her removal from the marital home, and you will ensure that she does not see a single red cent of Mark's money. Am I understood?" A beat of silence. "Good, have the papers ready for my signature as her employer by 8 o'clock a.m. Mark will be there to sign the divorce filings." Arthur slammed the phone down. He turned back to me, his chest heaving slightly. "You will not lose your home, Mark," Arthur said, his voice steadying, returning to that terrifying calm. "You will not lose your firm, you will not lose anything. You are a good man who was dealt a treacherous hand by a woman I am ashamed to call my blood." He walked over and placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. "Tomorrow morning, you go to work as usual. Harrison will handle the rest." She wanted a war, Mark, but she forgot who owns the battlefield. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in absolute surgical destruction. I went to my architectural firm the next morning, my stomach in knots, operating on zero sleep. At 9 o'clock a.m., my phone started blowing up. The first call was from Victoria. I let it go to voicemail. Then came the texts. "Victoria, Mark, what did you do? My company cards are declining, Victoria." "Mark, answer the phone. HR just sent me a termination email. What is going on?" "Victoria, Mark, my trust account is locked. My father isn't answering my calls. Did you talk to HIM?" I turned my phone off and put it in my desk drawer. At 11 o'clock a.m., while Victoria was presumably panicking in the house she thought she had stolen from me, there was a knock on the front door. According to the play-by-play I later received from Harrison, Arthur's apex predator of a lawyer, a process server handed her a thick manila envelope. It wasn't just divorce papers. It was a notice of immediate termination from her $250,000 a year phantom job. It was a formal notice that her trust fund, which she relied on to fund her lavish lifestyle, had been frozen pending a complete restructuring of Arthur's estate. And it was a legal notice giving her 48 hours to vacate my property, citing her admittance of infidelity and the prenuptial agreement she had haughtily signed years ago, assuming she would never be the one caught breaking the moral clauses Arthur had insisted upon. The coup de grace came later that afternoon. Arthur himself arrived at my house. He didn't come alone. He brought a team of movers and 2 burly security guards. Victoria, hysterical and crying, tried to run to her father, begging for his help, screaming that I had manipulated him, that I was a monster. Arthur stood on the porch, as cold and unyielding as a granite statue. He looked at his crying, pregnant daughter, the daughter who had tried to pass off another man's child as his legitimate grandchild, the daughter who had tried to steal from an honest man in his name. "You have disgraced this family, Victoria," Arthur said loudly, his voice carrying over her sobs. "You have 30 minutes to pack your personal clothing. Anything purchased with Pendleton Company funds stays, the jewelry stays. The car keys stay. You will leave this property, and you will not contact me again until you have learned the meaning of consequence." When she realized her father, her ultimate trump card, was not only abandoning her but actively leading the charge against her, she broke. The smug, arrogant woman who had laughed in my face less than 24 hours ago collapsed on the driveway, wailing. The security guards escorted her inside, supervised her as she packed 2 suitcases of clothes, and then escorted her off the premises. She had nowhere to go but to Jack's. The fallout was swift and brutal. Without her massive salary, without her trust fund, and without my credit cards, Victoria's reality crashed down upon her. Jax, the spontaneous artist and real man, suddenly found himself burdened with a hysterical, penniless, pregnant woman who demanded a lifestyle he couldn't afford on his irregular DJ gigs. Within a month, the reality of their situation set in. I heard through the grapevine Harrison kept me updated with a grim satisfaction that Jax had bylaid. The moment she asked him to get a day job to help pay for the tiny, cramped apartment they had been forced to rent, the passion evaporated. He packed his turntables and ghosted her, leaving her entirely alone. The divorce was finalized in record time. With Harrison representing me pro bono on Arthur's explicit orders, Victoria didn't stand a chance. She had no money for her own lawyer and was forced to accept the terms we dictated. She got nothing, no alimony, no house, no firm assets. She walked away with her clothes and the absolute ruin of her reputation. Arthur remained true to his word. He formally disinherited her. He restructured his will, leaving the bulk of his massive empire to various charities. In a quiet, private meeting a week after the divorce was finalized, Arthur asked me to stay on as a consultant for his real estate development branch. "You're a good architect, Mark," he had said, pouring us both a scotch. "But more importantly, you're an honorable man. I value that." It has been a year since the night my world exploded. I am sitting on the back patio of the custom home I built, drinking coffee and watching the sunrise. The house is quiet, but it no longer feels empty. It feels peaceful. I hear rumors about Victoria occasionally. She works as a receptionist at a low-end dental clinic across town. She had the baby, a little boy. I feel a pang of sorrow for the child, brought into the world amidst such a storm of deceit, but I feel absolutely nothing for the woman who bore him. She gambled everything on her own arrogance, believing her father's wealth gave her a license to be cruel. She thought she was playing chess, moving me around like a pawn while hiding behind her father, the king. But she forgot the most basic rule of the game. If you try to use the king for treason, the king will gladly execute the queen.